Hello, my name is Hamlet Dobbins, and this is Memphis Material, an oral history project chronicling the stories of the visual arts in Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis Material is a podcast celebrating the personal histories, the intimate stories, and the studio practices of some of the people who help shape the creative landscape of our city. These unedited interviews are all recorded at the Memphis Listening Lab, an archival gem located in the majestic crosstown concourse in beautiful Midtown Memphis. Now, the website for Memphis Material was designed by the wonderful Brian Dixon. Now, we don't really have sponsors for this show, but if we did have a sponsor for today's show, the third of 3 interviews that I did with the great Tom Lee, today's episode would be sponsored by Bread and Puppet Theater in Glover, Vermont. It is a magical place there in the Northeast Kingdom. You know that it's great when it's in a place that's called the Northeast Kingdom. It's just a little tiny ways away from the good folks at the Vermont Studio Center. It is a wonderful, magical place that everyone should visit. Now, again, today's interview with Tom Lee is the third of 3 interviews that I recorded with him. The interview that we're going to listen to today was recorded on November 21st, 2025. Enjoy the interview. Okay, today is Friday, September 21st. This is part 3 with Tom Lee. Let's see, Tom. So last time we were talking a bunch about you being there at MCA, and we were talking about how you were bringing some fiber things into your classes, in part to sort of mess with the powers that be for getting rid of the fiber/textile zone. Talk to me a little bit about, and if I remember right, this was sort of maybe in terms of timeline, this was maybe like maybe mid 2000s to the aughts. Yeah. Now, I can't remember. Were you at MCA when they ended up sort of calling it quits, or had you retired before then?
No, I was, I was there. They coincidentally we ended the year of the pandemic,
Right.
2020, right? So I was there, and then in March, the current president, Laura Hines, we had a meeting, and she said, I just talked to my kids, and they lost their sense of of taste, so they think they may have it, and that was mid March, early March, and I thought, well, this is I don't think it's going to be interesting, but it seemed like a real deal. So they sent us home, and they said, finish out the semester since it was the last one, and do everything online, which I was I was not willing to learn something new, for the next couple of months. And they were all graduating in May. So if they hadn't done everything by that time, I figured they haven't,
Because if I remember right, they had sort of decided to stop and to stop with that last class that they let in and let them sort of go through, or at a certain particular point, and then they would let them go through, and then it was kind of a skeleton crew of professors. I remember you and Susan Makastad were there, and then
yeah, and Leandra was there, and God, I can't even remember it, but it really weren't that many. It was like six of us, I think. But we had like a 2-year reprieve. They had decided 2 years before that we had run out of money and we were in debt, and how were we going to fix this? And then the new people came up with a scheme to get us out of debt. So coincidentally, at the time we closed, we were completely out of debt, which means we could have kept going. But we couldn't have kept going because everybody was gone, I suppose. But it was. I had to find humor in it where you could at the time. It was pretty. It was pretty. I guess it was good that we ended during the pandemic, the worst part of it. Hearing about all the death and mayhem and everything, and then we had died too, and it was like, well, I can only feel bad for one of these things, so I'm going to pick, people for the thing to kind of grieve about. So we never really had any kind of closure. I don't think, as the last part of the faculty or anything, because the graduation was online. When people, I forget who they had to do the video everything, but they went around to everybody's houses and had them do their little bit, in video, and then we all watched it on YouTube. So it was very, very strange.
Because you had been there since, was it 80,
89.
89?
Fall of 89.
And so a good 31 years.
Yep. Yep.
And I'm curious, like, we may have jumped ahead a little tiny bit thinking about you in the last maybe 10 years or so. And so I'm curious, in that last 10 years, talk to me a little bit about, because at that point you had been teaching for many years and you had sort of figured out in a way how to do this thing or to the best of our ability.
In a way, that's about right.
Well, talk to me a little bit about that, maybe the last 10 years of teaching. I'm curious to hear how you, as somebody who had taught for a long time, and then also you as somebody who sort of lives large in the lore of the MCA. I'm curious about your last few years there.
Well, man, it was a longer, odd stretch. 2001, September 11th, and walking into the business office and seeing, the second tower go down and going, man, this is strange, and that seemed like some kind of crazy marker for us, for the school as well. I think a real cultural marker. And then it was just showing up for a few semesters after that, just to everybody keep their wits about them and figuring out what life was going to be like. And then around 2010, I suppose, 2010, 2015, at least the last 10 years, we had let's see who this gets going. We had a notable uptick in our student population that included much more evangelical kinds of students. And, even at the time, the whole early push before Trump, even, the early push about that group of people being engaged in cultural institutes on a different kind of level. Before it was, it was easy to dismiss that thing. Even I hadn't been there that long, and the current grad director, Fred Rawlinson, he wanted to teach a grad course in the Bible, and I thought, yeah, that's not going to happen. You're never going to get away with that, and blah blah blah. And then to see the whole thing kind of roller coaster after a while, and the last 10 years really, it's like you could tell the population had changed, and the things that students were interested in had changed, and it was so I felt I was just kind of hanging on myself at that point, being so disagreeable with all of that, having grown up in it and knowing how confining that whole, not just the lifestyle and the culture, but the view of what we're doing in the world and all of that was. So it was strange. The last 10 years was really strange, and then 5 years, getting close to where they decided that we were in serious trouble. Um, the next to the last president we have, what was his name? I can't even remember. It's probably good that I don't. I think Jones, something like that. He was. I had my first meeting with him, and and um, and I told him that he reminded me of my grandfather, and I just wanted to sit on his lap. And and he didn't see the humor in that, and so I knew we were not going to be best buds after that, and so we just kind of. But he did. He was the same. Looked like he was in the same generation that my grandfather was, and wore a bow tie and had the gray hair and was all saggy, baggy faced and all of that. But he had a large part in us not being a school after he was there. Other people can probably be more specific about that, but he wasn't a good president. He wasn't a good fundraiser. He wasn't a good cheerleader. He wasn't. He took one look at the. They had the little art sale every fall. I can't even remember what it's called.
Oh yeah, the Holiday Bazaar.
Yeah, the Holiday Bazaar. Man, we were hanging that, and he came in and looked at it, and I thought, he really hates this. He does not like this at all, and he wants to get rid of this. Whether it was good or not was beside the point. It was a thing that had a long history in the school, and was, it let students feel good about being there and doing things. Anyway, yeah, that was that. God, just all the changes that happened the last 5-10 years. It was horrendous to see.
Now, when you were talking about the students having sort of a large uptick in the evangelical population, I'm curious, did you notice that they were more conservative in terms of the kinds of art that they wanted to see and talk about?
Absolutely everything. The things that they chit-chatted about in class, and the kind of, artwork that they would choose to engage in, or the way that they dealt with ideas. It was all very restrained or confined, or limited by their lack of imagination about the world outside of what they were supposed to be thinking about, I suppose.
I mean, to me, that's really surprising. I mean, I remember my time when I was there at MCA, and it was really a limited exposure that I had with the school. I only taught maybe a couple of classes there. And I remember the students were really super dedicated. And most of them, if I remember right, were sort of like from small towns. Like I remember Alex Warble or Alex Harrison and his sister Hillary. Like I remember both of them were from maybe a tiny town in Mississippi, and I remember they were just like totally on fire with the kinds of things that were going on in the school at the time. And so that, I mean, that is totally surprising. Do you think was it also like do you think it was also maybe a product or like a backlash against the things that were going on in the broader art world? I mean, I remember when that Unmonumental show came out, and I remember Tad and I had talked about it a couple of times, just the sort of the backlash against this, like what people saw as a lack of makership or craftsmanship being a big factor.
Yeah. Well, that was always a big part of the college, hands-on, and a lot less idea-driven. Yeah, I don't know. Our where we drew from was the thing that kept us small and I don't know what word to use. We're a regional art college, And the kinds of students that we took on were the kinds of students who had big ideas, but they didn't know what to do with them, and they didn't know where they fit in the world. And the best students that we had were engaged with, the larger world. We had a lot of kids from, the country. Some of them were great, and some of them were never going to escape, the way that they grew up and their limited vision of things. But we always did have it's probably the 5% rule in general. 5% of everything is good. And then the 95% of everything is kind of questionable, So we always had 5% of students that were just really great and on fire, and a little bit on the crazy side, but crazy good, as opposed to, like, I don't know, psychotic or whatever. Um, yeah. Anyway, that was what my point about that is that was the level that we were working at, a really humane, serving our area kind of mission that the faculty understood and took on. Um, we were never going to be the Atlanta College of Art, never going to be Savannah College of Art. Might have been whatever the one is that's in, is it Cleveland or Cincinnati? Maybe Cincinnati. Yeah, we could have been as good as them. They were really tiny too, but had really good programs and really good faculty up there also. But we were never going to be big. I mean, none of the art colleges were ever going to be big except for Savannah, and that was just purely money and greed and contempt for anything that was going to be humane or human.
I mean, I like how you were talking about being humane and human, and then also just kind of thinking about how you were talking about teaching the last time we met, how you were talking about the students and sort of Vita's mantra of meeting them where they are, and then, how you were talking about meeting them also where they are, but then also thinking about the things that they could be and how they could grow. I mean, to me, all of that sounds really powerful and really interesting. I'm curious, when you think about your time there at MCA, I'm wondering if there were moments that were particularly important for you either as a teacher or as a maker. I mean, you mentioned 9/11, but I'm curious about maybe some other artists who maybe came through, who did shows, or maybe even some other people that you worked with that were particularly important for you.
I'll tell you my biggest disappointment first.
Okay.
if her name comes to mind, God, Jackie Windsor.
Okay.
We had Jackie Windsor in, and she was getting a little long in the tooth, and I always just loved her. I loved her work. I loved the way she thought about the whole exploded, cube, that she went into great detail with. But it was disappointing because every other word that she said was and so she was not a public speaker, and I thought, don't ruin this for me. Just stop trying to do this if you're just going to do that, and be a little bit more engaging and a little bit more or less, whatever that was like. I shouldn't complain about that, but, she was like a superhero to me, one of the group of women sculptors in the 70s that were doing shit that would normally be, I don't know a nice way to say it. They were doing more manly work than the men were, I think, and they were doing it with such a sensitivity that men were incapable of doing it at the time anyway. And probably again, I don't know. That's the thing about fibers, though. It was ignored for like 40 years, and then when people did get into it, it was still the men that made, waves, and that were recognized for that stuff, and not the women doing the actual hard work of doing that. But yeah, there there's no one. Um, Man, I really just don't know how to answer that.
Well,
Um,
it was definitely a question that requires some
yeah, yeah,
forethought. I probably should have sent it
yeah.
to you before.
Well, there's I, uh, I've had a handful of people that I always go back to. Martin Puryear is one of them. He's one of the most amazing people on the planet, sculptors, and very hands-on, very craft oriented. He studied boat building in Norway or something,
Right.
just so he could build these sculptures that he was doing. And it was like, who even commits to that kind of thing? You're not going to be a boat builder. What is it you're wanting to do with this? And well, we found out what he was doing with it. Even the really current work of his, it's just, I just think it's astounding every time I look at it.
Yeah, me
Um,
too. I mean, he's one of those people that I did not really know about until there was a piece of his in St. Louis that's a wicker piece
mhm,
that they would have in sort of they weren't totally sure where to put it section. It was like it wasn't quite
mhm,
sculpture, it wasn't quite in the baskets in the cat, and in the pottery
yeah,
section. But I always remember that piece just being amazing, and then
yeah.
just here and there seeing some
Kind of a
pieces.
lopsided bottle shape with the neck on it, right? Yeah, yeah. Those things just. I mean, it's one of the reasons that I wanted to go into fibers. I learned how to do basket making because of that. How does this work, and how can you change or alter this material to make it do something that it really doesn't want to do, um, but that you're going to trick it into doing somehow. Plus, it goes back to the how do you make something out of nothing? You know, weaving is nothing. It's like that. That's all it is. I'm crossing my fingers over each other. Yeah, simple, basic things. So I think the artists that I like that way um, weren't weren't on a really high level, um, in the head as much as they were thinking about the materials that they were using and the processes they were using, and thinking about those in a very, very deep, meaningful kind of way. You know, I have a Louise Bourgeois book at home that's just about her fiber work. And have you seen that one? Oh, it's one of my favorites. Just to flip through and go, shit, shit, shit. I can't do that. I can't do that. She's already, she's just this little funky. I had a student who used to go to her. She used to have students over, once a week, and I had a student who got to be in on that. God, I can't remember her name. Anyway, and so I was very jealous about that too. Sitting around the living room talking to this kind of legend who nobody really, knew for a long, long time, or discounted her.
No, I mean, I love how you're talking about these two people that I also really love, and that I love talking to students about. I mean, both of those figures are particularly important for me. I'm curious, when you're thinking about Louise Bourgeois or you're thinking about Martin Purrier. I mean, for me, there's a kind of like in the same way that I think a lot of people like a lot of people for so many different reasons. The analogy I always use is Bob Dylan. It's like everybody likes Bob Dylan, but everybody likes Bob Dylan for a different reason. And so
Mm.
I'm curious, like when you're thinking about those two, for me, they are great to talk to students about because of their multivalent approaches in
Mm.
all things. I'm
Mm.
curious, when you think about those two people, do you think about them at all in terms of your studio practice?
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. Not directly like I don't lay a book. I'm making a reference, but I'm not going to explain the reference because it's too. He'll know who I'm talking about. I don't lay books out on a chair in the studio while I'm making something and look back and forth between it, just for some kind of, I don't know, who the hell even does that? You
I
know, it's
do
like,
it. I have a Lucian Freud book out right now that I'm looking at, and I'm just like, how the fuck did he do that? And then me trying to figure that out. And then that Paul Clay book is also laying out in the studio, and I'm just like, how did he do
well,
this?
but is it more inspiration, or are you really trying to like figure out some technical thing about it, or you're trying to really kind of understand the magic?
Yes, to all those
Because
things.
that's not going to work.
Yeah, yes, to all those things. I mean, both. I mean, there's so many. I mean, for me, that thought of having people like in the back of your head or people that you're thinking about is pretty common. But I know what you're saying. But I mean, to me, the thing that I'm thinking about you with, in particular, with Louis Bourgeois, is how you build those like almost like environments inside the gallery space. Like you'll have a big gallery space, and then you'll have almost like a tiny gallery space that you've made, you know, either using, you know, textiles or some of those drop cloths or some of those other things, and thinking about how you create a space inside a space. And then inside those spaces you have these really delicate, beautiful moments, sometimes inside big cantankerous structures.
Is there a question there?
No, not at all. No,
or
no,
that's now I'm turning red.
that
too.
is that's definitely
you know
the
that's a good description. We talked before about I don't like the word installation,
Right.
but you know, making a space in a space, yeah, that's a good way to do it with all this delicate stuff kind of interspersed. It's like how do you get the I there there are some definitions of what art is that I understand intellectually, but I can't abide them. And one is to strip everything out that's not essential, and that's what the art is. And I just think I'm going to town. Okay, well, you know, you stated a fact, but you know what's going to happen, how you're going to get there, what are you going to do when you're there, who you're going to run into, what kind of conversations you're going to have, what's the weather going to be like. You know, it's all that shit that I'm interested in, all the detail that maybe doesn't say something directly about this little fact, but it adds up to these you know, kind of observations of the trip that you're on along the way. You know, it's like I never cared if they made sense, if you would look at them, but the thing that I did want them to do, maybe I can't believe I'm going to say this either, is that they would have either a pictorial or a spatial kind of structural sense that could lead you through to some point of discovery. I wasn't totally anti-art, you know, about stripping things down. I do think that, you know, it's like architecture. If it doesn't have a door in it, how is it a building, you know? Or maybe it's a different kind of door or whatever, and you can play with those ideas. But still, you know, there are some things that I joked with Susan once about how to make a landscape. You take a piece of paper and you draw a line across it anywhere. And you have a landscape, you know, because that's where our brains work. But that's some kind of structural idea for me that if I play with that idea, then I don't have to worry about I'm making a landscape because it's going to be pretty obvious, that part of it. And then you don't have to think about, well, I'm looking at a landscape. You can you know, explore other ideas about how am I looking at this landscape, or how am I, you know, engaging with this space, and is it a mental space? Is it a real perspective space? Is it blah 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 blah? You know, I just get so so tired of words sometimes. It's like, that's not what we're doing. You make a thing, and then inside someone's head that engages with it, there should be some little explosion sometime. Even if it's not right away. It could be months or years later, and this little kind of goes on. Oh, I mean, I do that all the time. Just I can't believe I'm as old as I am, and I'm just finding out things about the world that I never knew before. And they're not even big things; they're just little bitty things. I can't give you an example, but it was something that happened this past week, and I went, oh, that's what that means. That is so stupid. I should go back to the fifth grade or something, to relearn that. Knowing something and understanding something being two totally different things.
Right. Well, I mean, also when I'm thinking about your work, and we talked about this a little bit last time, is how the process of making, begins with a particular thing, but then eventually through the process of making, there becomes a kind of broader understanding, not just of the story or of the object, but also of where it might go next. I mean, to me, that's something that I always really liked about your work, and that I was always really curious about. I mean, and then also, I can't remember if I talked about this last time or not, but I remember you came to my alternative media and methods class at Rhodes when I was teaching over there, and you had this great line where you said, if you put the whole story in the piece, what are you going to do later? And I tell my students that line all the time because it's such a great way of saying, like, yeah, you don't want to A, overfill the piece, and B, you also want to leave some room for other things, and then C, you also want all of the pieces to be able to talk to one another and lead or feed or somehow be connected and intertwined and better understood by seeing all of them. I mean, I think about that line a lot.
Yeah, yeah. I'm very suspicious of answers. I love questions, but the answers are like, no, you might want to think about that a different way.
Right.
It's
Now I'm curious. I mean, you were talking about you and Leandra and Susan being there, sort of part of the skeleton crew. I'm curious. Was there a kind of like last crew sort of camaraderie that formed out of that, or how did you think about these last remaining years with the colleagues there?
I think we were all so freaked out that it was actually happening and it was actually coming to an end that we all were just living in our own grief every day that we came to work, and because we really didn't we would have quote unquote faculty meetings or coffee, or we're all going to be in the same room talking about the same thing, but we're not going to really be engaged with each other. It was really, I don't know, it was sad that way. So I'm going to go with no for all of us anyway. I met Leandra when she was a grad student at Ole Miss. She was one of Sherry's advisees in her grad degree, and she was studying with Rondell, who we discussed. He was my grad advisor also. So I always loved the way her brain worked about artwork and about the world. She was a lot tougher than I was, but a lot more demanding's not the right word. She had a clearer vision of what she wanted students to get out of being with her than I did. I was a lot less specific. I had a student toward the end that said to me once, just tell me what to do. I thought, wow, 30 years of teaching, and this is what it comes to. Just tell me what to do. I must be doing something right, And that was going back to the other conversations about the the change in the kind of people that were going to art school. That was the big. Just tell me what to do. Part of it, the cultural thing about, well, college isn't to think anymore. It's to be able to get a job and to make a living and to do that. I just hated all that too. You go to college to find out who you are and to decide the kind of life that you're going to have, the kind of intellectual life that you're going to have, and emotional life. And, if you end up practicing what you get a degree in, you got to do something. But that was never my intention at all. It's an activity to where we're focusing on this one group of things, loosely described as art making. But for me, that was all just a vehicle for discovering who you were and how the world worked. It was just it was like a framework for making space inside of space.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't what the work was about.
Mm-hmm.
That was just an excuse to do all the other things to find out something about something.
Mm-hmm.
None of that makes sense, does it?
No, it did. Yeah, I was with you. Now, one question I had too was, I know you were talking at some point about being here in Memphis, and then I remember when I think you live in Clearwater, right? Is it Clearwater?
Coldwater.
Coldwater. Yeah. Okay, Coldwater. And so I know you live like kind of halfway in between here and Ole Miss.
Mm-hmm.
When was that you ended up being there?
We moved there in 2000. Either 99 or 2000.
Okay.
I forget. August the 1st. It was hot as hell. It was like 106 degrees. And I'd been out of town, and Howard Payne, that was his first year, and Sherry got him to come over to help. And that's all I could think. It was 106 degrees, and I was in Vermont. It was 100 degrees that week, but it was still not like Memphis in 106 degrees.
Right.
So, but that was the year that we moved down, and then we kept pretty close ties with Memphis for as long as we had the energy to do. But then Sherry just was more and more engaged with her job down there, and so that's where she ended up making her community. And then I just stopped coming to Memphis after that. It was just, I was the house boy at that point, taking care of all those fucking cats. So
now let's back up just a little bit. When was it that you met Sherry?
It was either 91 or 92. I can't remember because that was such a crazy time. So I hadn't been at the college very long. She wanted to go to grad school. And so I remember our interview with her on the phone, and I thought, man, she's nuts, because she talked about how much she liked graffiti on subway trains. There was some other stuff involved, but when her artwork was certainly very competent printmaking, but I thought, here's another older lady who wants to go back and do something. So I didn't know anything about her until she showed up, and then I made her cry the first critique that we had together. So, yeah, that was early 90s. So.
No, where was she coming from?
She was living in Nashville.
Okay.
She was married to a guy that worked in Vanderbilt, had a doctorate in education, something. He was one of the people who developed mainstreaming in school, which they're trying to kill off as fast as they can now, because you don't want those kind of people in school anymore. But he was really interesting as a person, but she was like super interesting, because I could tell that she had issues, and she had a lot of things on the inside that she needed to be on the outside. And that was the real reason that she was in grad school.
Now, where did Sherry go to undergrad? Was it there in Nashville?
Nope. She went to Hayes College in Kansas, and then she went to University of Kansas, and that's where she ended up. She did grad school, the late '90s, and then she had Herb, I think '69, and then she had to drop out of school, and so she was out of school for 20 years before she did, grew the kids up long enough until she was able to go back to school at that point. That's, you gotta admire that, dropping out, and having an occasional engagement with art making. She taught at Watkins for a few years, so while they were in Nashville. And I think that got her back into the whole game of it, and realizing how much she wanted to teach and everything.
And so she came to MCA and went to grad school there.
Yep.
And then what kind of work? You said her work was sort of pulling from, thinking about graffiti on trains.
Well, that's what she talked about. But her work, she was doing. She did this whole series of saints, but they were her family members. Did quite a bit of work about her mom. She really loved her mom. But they were. She did a lot of. I approached her through printmaking because she was doing a lot of woodcuts, which is very long and tedious and detail oriented. All that. They were really, really competent and good, but they. Like I said, I made her cry, implying that she needs to do something a little bit more serious. So, to her benefit, she didn't do printmaking for a while. She would take printmaking classes, but she did a lot of cut paper things. She did a lot of drawing. She was a hellacious drawer. Man, I was so jealous about the kind of facility that she had, and then she started working in really large scale. She did a series of kind of paper puppets that were all drawn on. It's going to be impossible to describe them. They were 10, 11 feet tall, and she started doing these kind of drawing collages on the wall by doing all these separate pieces, and so she was kind of playing around with kind of installation ideas herself and kind of temporary things. But I don't know.
Now, and so eventually she finished at MCA.
Yeah.
And then what was going on with Sherry after she finished with MCA?
She wanted to teach at the college really bad, but that didn't work out. She taught drawing there for a few semesters, and then she ended up teaching at U of M. I think she taught drawing there, and then she met the printmaker there, and so learned a bit about digital stuff as well. Ended up kind of being a distraction, I think. I mean, they were okay, but it was like digital printmaking stuff, which is fun to do. But it would have been 20 years before that was going to be, for the technology to be good enough to do anything that's made it worth all the effort to learn to do all that. And then I think it was 98 maybe she started teaching part-time at Ole Miss, and then taught there for a year part-time, driving all the way from Memphis, and then ended up staying there. And then that's when we decided we were living at living together at that time. That's when we decided we need to move like halfway there, and did that. So, and then she taught your regular slog of classes, and then ended up being the chair of the department, for 6 years. And she was a really good chair. Rebuilt the sculpture area for them. Well, she facilitated getting the funds that they needed for building, and helping supervise or helping out the sculptor down there build this really great facility. And they were in the new building also, art building. Not the one that I was in, but anyway, she well, you know her. She never met a stranger, and she was really good at engaging people, and she had a really great outlook on life and on art and on people and everything. I never ever saw her be an asshole, and I've had plenty of opportunities myself to be that way, but I think as much as her artwork, which I admired greatly, and she was a lot better at me at almost everything, but it was really her humanity that was the strongest aspect about her.
Now, I'm curious, to go from the, I know it's complicated to have a kind of like teacher-student relationship and then to be in a relationship. I'm curious about how your conversations in the studio went, because you guys were together for a long time. Did you guys have a lot of studio?
I was technically never her teacher.
Right. Okay. Good. I like how you put that
I never
on the
graded
record.
her.
Right.
I would take part in critiques, but she was really overseen by Remy and Fred more than myself. So I kind of tried to do the right thing and stay out of that. I would bring her peanut butter sandwiches to the studio though to sustain her day, and it probably it was probably a bad thing that we did, but who can argue with 30 years together and having an amazing life, and both of us learning so much about the world because we were with each other. It's and she was 6 years older than me. That's my other excuse. she was robbing the baby from the cradle, not me. And she knew what the hell she was doing. She had a lot more life experience in it than I ever had too. But still, they when it was God, what do they call it? When she had her orals. They threatened to lock me out of the building. And the dean also at the time told me I needed to stop. You can't do this. Well, I didn't listen to either of them, and I ended up being at her orals. So, which Vita was on. That's why they admired each other so much too. Anyway, it was crazy as times.
I imagine. Now, thinking about how you guys moved in together, what was the studio setup like? Did she have a studio there at Ole Miss, or did you have a studio at the house?
Well, when we were in Memphis, she lived in this little house over on Mignon, and it had a back room that had been added on, and that was her studio space. And when I moved in, I was working outside most of the time. And so, she got the good space, and I got whatever was left. And I had a little bit it had a tiny one-car garage. So I converted that and built kind of a drop shed on the side of that for that. And then when we moved to Memphis, when we looked for a house, we looked for a place that we could convert into studio space, and that's what we found. 2.5-car garage with a screened-in porch that was 15 by 30 feet that was attached to the house. So that part, I walled in everything, and so that was our studio space.
And so it was a shared studio space.
Do what?
It was a shared studio space.
No, she had the screened in part, and I had the more the garage part.
Right.
So
Oh, okay.
hers was slightly smaller, but they were connected.
Yeah.
You know, we had a door between ourselves, but we were, you know, it was always open. But it was outside of the house, so technically the studio was attached to the house.
Mm-mm. Gotcha.
Yeah.
And then you were talking about 30 years together and seeing the world better for it. I'm curious, when you think about being connected to another artist, I mean, of course, we have partners, but then sometimes when they're an artist, it's even more interesting and strange. Talk to me a little bit about maybe the conversations or maybe the things that you found together.
Well, it's better. Everything. You know, if you're an artist and you don't marry another artist, you're an idiot to do that. You know, it's just it's yeah, it's, you know, you wake up in the day and you say anything, and they're going to have the sense of what you're saying just because you have the same mindset about so many things. Even if you don't agree on the artwork you're doing, we had the same. We never had conversations about our art with each other, and that's the other thing that's really I would recommend. You know, you don't have to because you're in the studio with somebody and you see what they're doing. Why are you going to be a jerk and go, you know, you need to add more red to that, or, you know, whatever. You know, it's more of a supportive situation, you know. Brain drift.
Me too.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah.
I was just making a mental note to make sure to remember not to do that thing about the red. Now, and so I'm also real interested in. I mean, I remember that you said a little bit ago that you were in Vermont, and I remember that you were the one that told me that I was supposed to go to Bread and Puppet. And so I'm curious, when you are thinking about these times that were important for you, you mentioned Vermont. Talk to me a little bit about that residency where you were there.
It was a lot of fun because there were all these people there who had just gotten out of grad school. You know, mostly because that's the kind of place it is. It's where you meet and greet and make connections and all this. So I didn't have to do that. So I could just be. It was like a nice vacation for me, and so I mostly hung out with the writers, though. You know, they'd have writers come in, however often that was. I was up there for like 3 weeks. It's supposed to be a month, but I got lonely and came home a week early. That and the phone bill was horrendous. It was all landlines at the time, you know. But the writers were nuts. The writers were great, and there was a badminton court, you know, outside the sculpture studio. So that's where people would go after dinner, and the writers were just vicious and played. And they would really get into it, and we're not very kind the way that they played. So I enjoyed being around that kind of thing. You know, the other was like being in school is like hanging around grad students who didn't know what to do with their lives, and so it was not. I met some really nice people there, but it was not. I had no idea why I was there. You know, I didn't have a plan. I made a good bit of work while I was there, mostly in response. What was the guy's name? It was one of the founders, Wolf something.
Wolf Kahn.
Wolf Kahn.
Yeah.
Yeah, he came for a visit. Have I told you this story already?
No.
Oh, okay. So I'll tell you a story before I get to the wolf. So everybody show slides, you know, while you're there in the lunchroom, and then everybody has a good time and everybody's supportive and go, yeah, and it's really nice. There was this Chinese kid there that was a painter, and he They were the most beautiful paintings I've ever seen in my life. And he put the first one on the screen, and it was just luscious, gorgeous. And it's a top view of a toilet. And he said, I paint shit. So that's what his work was. It was all, picture the toilet with different, little compositions of poop that he had made, apparently. And we were just rolling on the floor. It was just amazing. He was probably the best painter I've seen in a long time, but mostly because of that. I paint shit. Well, you don't paint shit, so that makes it really interesting. They're not shit-y anyway. They're really kind of amazing. Anyway, without going into too much detail about that, so Wolfgang shows up for his yearly visit, and I happen to be there, and he challenges everybody in the lunchroom. I'm gonna go on rounds of critique, and if you think you can keep up with me, then you just follow along. And I thought, really, you found a place just so you can have your own personal assholedom of telling people how smart you are and all of that. And it was the year his daughter was making a documentary about his life, and so that was part of the act, I think, to get that on film. So I had a really not very positive response to him being there and to him acting like that. So I started this big work on canvas that had a big ugly wolf in it, of course. You got to be direct sometimes. So that was the best time that I had there. But I left him alone. I didn't, who was I? I was just 40. I was just 40 years old, just turned 40. So, I certainly didn't know enough to engage a legend until a legend. He wasn't a very good painter either, I don't think. And he was boring, very, very boring. His paintings were boring. I'm sure he was probably hot shit in the whenever he was younger, when it was, the 50s or whatever, or the tail end. Was he an abstract out of that school, or he was post that, wasn't he?
I can't remember.
Yeah.
I
Landscapes,
yeah,
but they were just not. I just thought, why are you even wasting your life doing this? Oh, you're making a lot of money, aren't you? Yeah. And then he, it was nice of him to found that place.
Yeah.
It was I don't know what it's like now, but that part of its heyday, I think. There were a lot of people, everybody wanted to go there, and it was a fun time to be there. There was no email. You had to walk up to the little college on the hill if you wanted to send an email, and it was a pain in the ass, but that was a great thing about it, too. But, the country, it was great, and, Bread and Puppet Theater. Got to hang out with all the old hippies.
Now, what did you? I would love to just hang out and talk about Bread and Puppet. Talk to me a little bit about what was it? What was it that struck you?
The whole over the top theatricality of it. Did you go? Were they still? Yeah. So they're in this kind of natural amphitheater, and they do the story that involves the giants, and the giants are these giant puppets that are in 4 or 5 parts and different people manipulating them. But even before that, the guy, I guess the main guy, he's sitting on the side of the bus, on the top of the bus, and then he stands up and he's got these stilts on. So he's wearing these 10 feet tall stilts, and he's not using his hands, and he's got this Uncle Sam kind of thing on, and he's got these 2 trumpets that he's holding, and he's blasting while he's walking through this field. And then all these giants are moving up and these different things. It was just I responded it very, very positively.
Yeah,
But
no.
it was so exciting. And there were so many people there, and I thought, half these people have no idea what the history of these people are, and how they were so engaged in the anti-war movement in Vietnam, and and they should appreciate this a little bit more than they seem to be doing, you know. And they were still giving away bread, I think, and feeding people, but yeah, it was strange. It was strange. I was so proud of myself for doing that. It's not something I would normally do. So, but I made myself go and do that, and it was, totally worth it.
Well, I remember I think I had told you that I was going there, and I remember you were telling me about the badminton, and then you were telling me about bread and puppet, and that I needed to make sure that I did that. And I went twice. It was amazing. Uh, Now, I'm also curious. So, thinking about that, I remember last time when we stopped, you were saying that there was a part of Terry's story about the Memphis Center for Contemporary Art that you wanted to
Oh
talk about.
yeah,
What was it
oh yeah,
again?
yeah. Um, I don't know if she was misremembering or just mis misremembering one or the other. Um, yeah, we there was someone else had a show in the front half. It was when they had the wall dividing, and someone had the front half, and she and I had the back half. And she had these paintings on the walls, and she had made a painting directly on the wall in the back that were of these kissing fish, bright pink. Is about all I can remember, and I thought that's the weirdest shit I've ever seen in my life. I don't know what it means. I don't know what she's into, and the paintings were big, and they involved, one of them was horses, and one of them was dogs, I think. But I didn't know her well enough to say, what are you doing here? Blah. I just remember we were there at the same time, and we had lunch together, and she had this massive migraine headache at the time, and then we did an interview on Weevil, and so they're chatting to us, and she knows how to do radio because she starts talking, and then and then they ask me something, and I just nod my head or something, and so they have to remind me, it's radio. Oh, okay. So that was fun too, but yeah, it was a good show. I remember that, and it was the first big sculpture that I had made in a long. It was the first, installation or space inside a space, and man, I liked it a lot. Had a penis in it. Had a big wonking wooden penis on this figure that he was wearing a dress jacket, but he had no pants on and no shoes on, and I don't know what else to say about that without showing pictures of it. I still love that piece. But that was the weirdest. And what possessed me, I have no idea. Guy with no pants with his. Mm, anyway,
I love the things that we remember about shows. Like I remember, I like how you said, like, oh, I remember it was good. I remember it was a good show, and I remember, the pieces working well together, and and then, and the things that you remember about it totally. As someone who does these interviews a bunch, I'm always curious about how things are solidified or not solidified in the brain of the rememberer.
yeah, yeah.
Were there other shows that you remember as being particularly important for you in terms of thinking about your practice? Because I mean, to me, when I think about your work too, is I think there's a life of the piece that happens in the studio or in the home, and then the
Yeah,
life of the piece once it gets installed.
yeah. Um, the one, the one, the show that was called Heart Factory, and it was a two-person show at the college. I had half the gallery, and Maritza had the other half of the gallery. Um, and I had blocked off the space with this grid made out of string, like 2 foot by 2 foot, just to keep people out because there was stuff on the floor. I'll have to show you pictures of that sometime. But that show I thought was significant because it happened immediately after the whole shutdown of the school because, I'd been fired at the time. And God, I did so much for that. It was a most full show I've ever done with so many different kinds of things that were in it. And I thought it reinforced my confidence that I could actually do a show like that, and that I thought that it looked good, and other people were willing to go and look at it. But it was totally no one could go in except for the kid that crawled under during the opening and had a nice walk around, some like 4-year-old. And I'm going in there because parts of it looked like toys. Some of it looked like a little tricycle in there, and looked like a little wagon with other stuff in it. But yeah, I'd engaged every part of the space. So I redid the floor, redid the wall, even did the ceiling. Probably a meaningless detail, but I'd arranged all the lights in the all the can lights in a particular way, so that it complemented. They weren't just I'm going to put light here and I'm going to put light there. It was like a total immersion of an idea for me. So I got a lot of mileage out of that, and then it, I think, naturally led to the next kinds of things that I did after that. It's all I wanted to do after that. I thought, I don't want to make objects anymore. I want to make a bunch of things and put them together to see, what happens.
And now I'm also really curious about life after the school's closing, and I'm curious about how the time in the studio is different.
Um, well, it's not so much anymore. I mean, really, people got, I think the general public got really tired of hearing people whine about how bad the pandemic was, but it was fucking horrendous, and I don't think any of us are ever going to get over that the way that it totally changed everything. And then everybody's like, wow, that was weird. Let's get back to something fun now, you know. But it also coincided when Sherry had a stroke in 2016, and she came out of the bathroom dressed for work, and she said, that's what she sounded like. And I went, think you might be having a little stroke there, honey? Oh, it's the medication. So I thought, I didn't know. I'd never knew someone who had a stroke. It wasn't like the half of the face and all that. It was just like she was a little bit tipsy. And so I thought, well, if you're going to work, good luck. We had that kind of relationship but she didn't want me to take her to the hospital either. She was stubborn that way, even later on. So she drives up to Old Mill. She gets there. Oh yeah, she drove to work. She walks in. The secretary takes one look at her, and it's like an hour drive. Right? So the secretary takes one look, and she says, yeah, get in my car. Here we go. We're going to go to the hospital. Why are we going to the hospital? All right. You'll find it. I don't know if I had called her or not. Anyway, they took her to the hospital, and then they said, we have this shot, because it was getting close to that. I had no idea what the window was because she always got up earlier than me, so I don't know when she actually had the stroke. So she said, "I don't want a shot," and they said, "Okay, well then you're gonna die." And she said, "I'll take the shot." And then they put her on a helicopter, and then flew her to Baptist East. Um, and then I was driving back and forth between Memphis and Oxford, back and forth, because I didn't know where she was. The secretary called me after they took her and said, we took her, she's had a stroke, and blah, 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 and they're sending her to Memphis. So I was trying to find her at that point. So I finally meet her at Baptist, and they wheel her in, and she just happy as a clam. Said, "I rode the helicopter." Thought, well, this is interesting. She was in ICU for 2 days. She went back to work the next Monday.
Wow.
So apparently it was nothing. It was like this little blip of nothing. Well, and then that fall, the grad students recognized she wasn't the same person at all. She had forgotten how to do shit in the print studio. She knew everything about everything, in the studio, and she was very forgetful. So they put her on medical leave, and then they retired her at the end of the next May, I think, which would be 2017. So then she wasn't so bad until the year of the pandemic, and when I started being home, it was about the right time for me to start being home, and then it just got worse and worse. So my point with that, I think, is everything kind of coincided, and so I had stopped thinking so much about what Tom wanted to do, and was doing the caretaker of this person who was, kind of disappearing, a little bit at a time. And so, I stopped thinking about art. I stopped doing art, except for the last year. She needed me to be right with her all the time, and so I ended up making a quilt, because that's something I could do sitting right next to her at the time. So that's really the only artwork that I really engaged in for a while. After that, it's a pretty nice quilt, if I must say myself. And then I made a couple of other quilts after that, but after she had already died and all of that. But then I thought I just I had no motivation to be in the studio, and I would do things, but it wasn't the same kind of either an intellectual or emotional kind of drive that I had. So I kind of just stopped, and then decided, if I'm going to do stuff, it's going to be on the house. And so I started doing all these projects on the house that, that's what the art has become. So I'm not in my studio thinking about, I'm doing this in order to put it somewhere, for it to do this. I'm actually transforming my house into, for lack of a better word, I'm making it Tom. I'm putting holes in the walls for certain things, and I learned to do what's it called, the hard tile, the vinyl, not like the stick down, but like the old school stuff. So I've made a couple of floors pictorially with that, cutting out lots of little pieces to put in there. So it's not studio work, but it's more meaningful work to me as an expression of, whatever it is that I've turned into. That, and I decided after 50 years that, I may have mentioned when I started school, I was a music theory. Um, that's what I was going for. And then I had to learn how to play the piano when I sucked at it. So that's why I went into art, because it was going to take too long to learn the piano. But I love the theory aspect of it, and so that's what I spent the last couple of years doing, is learning what I should have learned 50 years ago. Not to have a musical career or to do anything, but to kind of close this kind of circle that I always felt was open. So I'm relearning how to play musical instruments again. But mostly it's the theory in music is just so, and it's so close to art. There's this whole structure that it has, and if you do things a certain way, then you can have certain effects, emotional effects, or even in your head, color effects or mood effects or anything like that. It's like, it's very, it's a lot, for me, it's a lot more fulfilling than doing the artwork. Yeah, I love making objects. I still piddle around with it, but it doesn't move me as much as actually making music does.
Now, what kind of things are you listening to, or what kind of things are you making?
It's funny, because man, I listened to things when I was a teenager that teenagers listened to, and then when I went in the military, I started listening to broaden my horizons, because people from all over. But it was still mostly, rock and roll. And then Southern rock and roll hit really big at the time, Allman Brothers Band. And then that led me into more, not really jazz, but more complex kinds of music. And then David Grisman popped up, and the mandolin. Do you know him? Oh, he invented this thing which was a blend of jazz, um, bluegrass, and kind of Middle Eastern kind of effect. And he called it dog music, DAWG. It's very, 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 very good. He's still alive too. He's the oldest story. But he did a couple of albums with Jerry Garcia. Not dead kind of stuff. Jerry Garcia was really an amazing musician, outside of the dead zone also. So at some point I decided, mandolin would be fun because they're small and they're portable, and it can't be that hard to learn. It's hard as hell to learn the mandolin. But since I picked that up, I've started listening to a lot of bluegrass, which in the old days I would never approach. I just hated that stuff because, hillbilly music, who wants to listen to that? But contemporary stuff, especially, even Bill Monroe's stuff now is pretty interesting to go back and listen to, just because of what they were, trying to accomplish on this thing. But so a little bit of everything, and drone music. Drone music is my jelly. It's whether it's actually a genre called drone music, which is from Scandinavia, but it's basically, industrial music, the Germans have. I had a student once, a German girl, and she said, "Tom, do you know Massive Attack?" I went, "No, I don't know who that is. Do you know Massive Attack?" Yeah, that was my doorway into that. So that kind of industrial quasi dance music, and then the mood music, and then the kind of droning on music, and then Middle Eastern music, and then Indian music. It's like everything has exploded in my head, and now I'm willing to listen to anything, even opera, which I never really understood. But there's just some amazing things. I'm trying not to be so close-minded about music the way I was then, and about art the way that was then. People do stuff, and if it's good, great. If it's not good, There's always more to try out somewhere else. So, but it's very challenging. I mean, I mean, I'm gonna be as good as I can possibly be, but I'm not doing it in order to be good. I'm doing it in order to find out again something about something. You know, it's just a different media for me, and I like it because it's one thing I was going to say about art earlier. Art, people act like art is a noun, but it's a verb, and so that's what music is to me. Music is a verb. You know, it's a thing that changes over time, and it's the only reason. How long do people look at paintings when they go in a gallery? How long?
I can't remember what the stat is. It's something like, less than 0.5 seconds or something crazy like that.
It's under 5 seconds. If you look at something for 5 seconds, that's a long fucking time to be looking at something. If you listen to a song, you're in for the duration.
Right,
You know,
or
it
an
might be
album.
5 minutes, but you're going to get a lot of stuff, and depending on the music. And some music that I listen to, it's 30 or 40 minutes long. You know, it's not orchestral, but it's very complex and interesting. You know that band? I think they're Irish. Langham. Oh, they're so good. Traditional Irish music, kind of drony, very drony, and very kind of weird, and so it will get you off. If you don't have a favorite way of you know, getting into a headspace, they will do it for you. Yeah.
Now, I'm curious about, you were talking about your house. I mean, one of the things I usually will ask people, sort of as we get towards the end of the conversation, is about their domestic space and how the things that they live around are important to them. And you mentioned making the house more Tom. I'm super curious, can you give me an example? I mean, you were talking about the putting holes in the walls for particular things. I'm super curious about this newfound desire or this thing that you're doing with your house.
Well, um, I love my house. Um, I picked out the house because the realtor took us for a tour. There were people living there at the time, so they were trying to stay out of the way. And as we walked through the house, I thought, man, this is really odd. It was cobbled together. It's one of the houses that was moved off the Coldwater River in the 40s, up the hill. There were like a dozen houses that they moved with mules and wagons and lots of you know, laborers. It was the 40s. Anyway, so I didn't like the house until we walked into the kitchen area, and the kitchen door, which opened onto the laundry room, and then it was a back door, and then it was a screened-in porch, and then the so before I even got to all that, the kitchen door was God, what's it called? It's a double the door that split, the Dutch door or something like that. And so I thought, it's Mr. Ed's door. I said, we're going to get this house. I want that door. So that's and then we saw the space that we could make. But really, that was a clincher. So that's my favorite part of the house, because it reminds me of Mr. Ed. You know, him talking to the horse, sticking his head through the door. Everything. I know that sounds crazy, but when we first moved in and the house was empty, it was so huge compared to the house in Memphis. She was on one end and I was on the other, and we were like this, waving at each other. Hey, how you doing way down there? So, but it still had, all the walls intact. So I decided I want to be able to see all the way through the house, from the backyard to the front yard, from the side yard to the side yard. So that was one of the reasons I've started putting holes in the walls, for looking through the house. So that the house becomes this one kind of enclosed or connected space, and it's not these separate rooms.
Now, how big are these holes?
Uh, Whatever fits between the 2x4s.
Okay.
And some of them are like 2 feet, 3 feet. No, one of them is I can step through. I put it low to the floor. So some of them are a little bit like windows, and some of them are like doorways. And then some of them I'm filling in with things or framing in different ways. But it's like, and I took all the doors down. We had totally we Sherry liked to collect doors, so we had different doors on, but I wanted it to be open, and so I took all the doors off and put them all up in the attic, and now I'm knocking holes everywhere, and now I can see. So the thing it does too, if you're walking through the house, you will catch a glimpse out the front door when you're in this room that used to be totally enclosed, and it's this nice little surprise of, hey, how you doing? So it's a little bit voyeuristic, I think, you know, but but it's crazy ass, and it's just like right up my alley. I just put a new one in just the other day between the kitchen and the dining room, and instead of making a rectangle, I've tipped it up so it's a different kind of space. So I think that's where I'm going next with that. Is
I feel like when we get done with this, I want you to somehow take this recording and have it in the house so that, like, later when people move in and they're like, what the hell was this dude doing? That way they'll just have this little moment where they're like, well, there was an artist and he lived here, and then there was this story, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. Yeah. Now I'm also really curious when we're talking about your domestic space. I love how you're talking about the house. I'm super curious. Are there objects, art or otherwise, that are particularly important to you in the house that you live with that feed you somehow?
yeah, a couple of pieces from ex students. Um, Bob Burdett You remember him? Yeah, I traded him for some carvings of these devil people, and they're just. I have them where I can see them every day when I walk through. They're almost human size. I I've taken most of the artwork down, and with at some point when it gets far enough along, then a lot of stuff is going to go back on the walls. But right now it's pretty stripped down, so I can paint the walls or make pictures on some of the walls. I'm I'm painting all the ceilings, pictorially. It's taken me forever, but I don't have anything else to do. So I figure I've got a good 10-year plan. As long as I have something that's unfinished, I can't die. that's my longevity plan.
I feel like if ever there were an ending statement for an interview, it would probably be that one.
It just sounds good to me.
Okay, Tom, thank you so much for coming in. I appreciate it.
Thanks for doing this, Hamlet. It's awesome.
And that was the third of 3 interviews that I recorded with Tom Lee. This interview was recorded on November 21st, 2025. Please join us next week when we will have another interview. Until then, thank you so much for listening.